All right.
Okay, so hi Nikki. So anyway, just for the benefit of my students, could you tell me a little bit about yourself first before we start our discussion about
Uh,
your background? Yeah,
yeah.
working there at.
Okay. My name is Nikki Torres. No? So right now I am primarily a production manager for the Cultural Center of the Philippines, which is a government institution. It is the biggest government institution that deals with culture and the arts. When I was in college, I actually studied political science. I love the social sciences, and they marry very well with culture. Um, as I was talking to you, Jamie, just a few minutes ago, I realized that I was in college in the late 80s, which means that in 1986, I was
Oh yeah,
there, and the faculty and the academe had a similar issue. It was like, go to the rally, what about your studies? So in UP at that time, where I studied, in UP where I studied, the decision was for everyone to just either get a grade of pass or fail,
right,
similar to what's happening now.
exactly
So
right.
yeah, so it just occurred to me it's quite interesting because you have that many decades ago. But again, we go through these crises on periodically, and we have to deal with them. And as a production manager, my job really is to deal with not just the planning, the execution, but all the crises that arise, big and small. Clearly, COVID is beyond big. Well, that's my job, to deal with everything and figure out a way around it. Ayun.
Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of like with my students, a lot of them, of course, have been focusing on creating of their art and all that. Part of the class that we've been taking has been showing them there are a lot of things that happen. For your art to happen, for your art to reach other people, so many other things have to happen. There's so many other people who have to be around that you have to work with and to collaborate with. Um, for example, because you're there in a cultural institution, of a very important cultural institution here in the country. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what has to happen, like for example, for a show to come about? How many what kind of working parts have to sort of gel and start moving for these things to happen?
Okay. Um, in terms of the government and arts and culture, you have two major organizations. One is the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, which was born in 1987 after the revolution. Uh, and then, of course, there's the Cultural Center of the Philippines, which is a product of which is a brainchild of Imelda Marcos, but which completely changed its focus after the revolution. It took us a long time. It took us a very long time to figure out our working relationship with the NCCA. But in the end, I think it would be interesting for the students to know that one organization, the NCCA, has the funds.
Mhm.
So and they have the network. Every other cultural organization, the National Library, the National Historical Commission, etc., are under the umbrella of the NCCA. So they have the power to affect change in terms of policies and all that because they have all of their subcommittees, and they have the funding. The
Mhm.
NCCA is the organization that gives funds. As for the CCP has the venues. We have the performance venues, we have the venues for screenings of films, we have the fine arts venues, we have the exhibit venues, and we have institutional memory because every single thing which was performed at the CCP was documented and stored in our archives, and we're so slowly digitizing that. For students, because we reorganized, the CCP reorganized, we now are divided not according to art form but according to function.
Mm.
So this for students, we have what we call our arts education department, and it is their job to reach out and teach whatever art form there is. So for instance, Jamie, for our project, the project that we worked on together before, the Virgin Labfest, the
Yeah.
fellowship program is
Mm.
under arts education.
Okay.
So now my role, or my unit, is almost, it is like the production arm of the building.
Yeah.
So when we have student groups, and occasionally we give students, we give them venue grants. We are the people who make this happen.
Mm.
Actually, that's a good summary of my job, to make it happen within the laws of, first, the country. Of course, everything has to be legal, and then the bureaucracy, because it is a bureaucracy, hundreds
Right.
and hundreds of papers. So that's,
Well,
I think, an overview of,
mm.
yeah.
Well, what's the bureaucracy like working for a government institution as opposed to, for example, like I think a lot of the students might be, start off working for many private organizations like ad agencies or studios and all that. For you, what's because it's government, what's the difference in being an employee for that kind of organization as opposed to a more private one?
Okay. Well, the government has very stringent rules, and it is a bureaucracy. There's no other word for it. There are systems in place which emanate from the center, the national government, and occasionally these systems do not adjust to the nature of your job.
Mm.
However, I think if we were to look at it from a positive point of view, the major difference between a private corporation and a government corporation is, in terms of funding, we have to be very careful because we are taking care of taxpayers' money.
Right.
And as such, in terms of auditing, in terms of finance, we have to be very careful about what we spend on, because we are spending your money.
Mm.
Now, in terms of systems, although we are trying very, very hard to be paperless, we are not paperless. It's very clear,
Mm.
because again, we are so careful about our expenditure that you need four or five eyes to approve a single document. So it is really much slower. Although in the time of Arroyo, there was an attempt to streamline the government and
Mm.
to get rid of positions which were either duplicating each other or which were deemed, useless, really, for lack of a better word. The other thing with the government is, in terms of job security, you have much more job security in the government as compared to the private sector.
Yeah.
If you are in a private company, and I have worked for a private company, your boss is the king, and provided he doesn't do anything illegal, it is completely his option whether to keep you there or not. Not so with the government. You cannot, once you are hired, you cannot be fired unless you go through many, many steps. Um, I mean, for instance, in the government, the rule is that a piece of paper, a document, should not stay on your desk for more than um, 14 working days.
Mm.
But 14 working days is a long time. That's two
Yeah.
weeks, 3 weeks in our case, because we only have 4-day work
Right.
weeks.
Tuesday to
That
Friday. Yeah, which
cannot,
is no Monday.
yeah, that cannot be in a private organization. You get a piece of paper, you get a document, you got to get it out
Yeah.
within the hour. But yeah, there is actually an office order to that degree, to that states that. So if anyone has fallen in line in any government agency, that explains it.
Ah, okay. I didn't know that. with with what do you call this? Um, One of the things I always talk to people about, especially now, I think it's become very clear, or with this crisis, the it especially in the artistic field, you're always trying to figure out, do I opt for employment where there's more security, but at the same time I don't have as much control over, because I'm basically not my own boss. I have to, either follow what the head of the company or the organization does or the government does, as opposed to being a freelancer, or I'll start my own studio or my own theater company or my own band or studio or whatever. And then, of course, now when the whole world, the whole country suddenly come to a standstill, the question becomes, okay, so we're losing projects, or there's no income and all that, and the importance of security, becomes an issue. How, like for you, how do you think the creative fields are dealing with that? Like, because we've been seeing a lot of things online that many. It seems that a lot of people in the creative fields are apparently freelancers also, and so is there a reason why? One, is there a reason why do you think there's so many? Are people forced to be freelance because of the nature of the industry? Or is it more of a choice thing? And is that something that should change later on? Do you think? So one thing, like for
Okay,
example, in performing arts, like for example, one of the big controversies before, I think, was the whole Ballet Philippines thing,
yeah,
where, diba, that's where me and my wife, of course, were also embroiled, talking about.
I'm
But that,
sure.
but in Ballet Philippines, like them, the dancers there are mostly employees. They're the company members, if I got that correctly. While in other theater companies, they use a lot of more freelancers. So um, those are like two different, from what I understand, those are two different, very different models of how two different kinds of companies operate. Do you think with what's been happening now, is there going to be a shift of the way companies bring in people?
It's a matter of numbers. I think it's a matter of numbers because, to my knowledge, there is only one theater company, which is Tanghalang Filipino, the resident theater company of the CCP, that pays its actors, the actors company. They pay them on a salary basis,
Salary?
regardless of whether there is a performance or not.
Mhm.
Ballet Philippines also has that capability, but no one else does.
Right.
Um, the problem here is that we are not yet we keep pushing Congress and the DTI to recognize culture and the arts as a creative industry, which means that we need them to recognize that the gross national product, a significant part of the gross national product, comes from the arts
Arts.
and culture and everything that encompasses. Because we're talking right now, Jamie, we are very familiar with the performing arts scene. But right now, even a visual artist, for instance, would probably
Mhm.
not have the ability to exhibit his works, to have them sold, etc. So the arts in general is suffering because, in general, in this country, everyone is freelance.
Right.
What would motivate a company to get to give regular employment to the artist? I think what would motivate them to give regular employment, which means salaries, twice a month with the benefits and all of that, what would motivate them to do that would be the steady influx of income.
Mhm.
Income comes with sponsors, income comes with audience. Those things do not come in regularly.
Mhm.
Uh, Tanghalang Pilipino will have 6 productions per year. Um, no, PETA will have a similar number. Dulang UP, but Dulang UP is a teaching arm.
Right.
Ballet companies have much fewer. So because they have that, and you cannot really charge thousands for your ticket. So it
Mhm.
goes down to numbers. You cannot employ people regularly if you do not have the guaranteed income to do that. And I know that there are attempts. There is an ongoing fight, or people are going to Congress. They are going to the Department of Trade and Industry. They are going there just so people are encouraged to treat our industry as an industry and not something for fun. Now,
Right.
in comes COVID, and people lose jobs. People lose jobs because they are freelance. I don't think people are freelance by choice.
Mhm.
They are freelance because there simply is not enough people to hire them on a regular basis.
Right.
And then if you look at the term freelance, you also have to understand that every company, ballet, folk dance, theater, etc., will have a pool of freelancers. So it almost feels like this one person is regularly employed by this company, but that's not actually true. He's only employed on a per show basis. It's
Mhm.
just that you have preferences as to which
Right.
people you get, including the CCP, no? So in comes COVID, and suddenly everyone is out of a job. Uh, I personally am very proud of the performing arts community because within a week of COVID, within a week of the lockdown, I was getting messages left, right, and center, and I was having to gather the data on the daily wage earners, on the people who were paid minimum wage from the resident companies of the CCP, and from the freelancers whom we work with regularly at the CCP. And we submitted this to Artists Welfare. We submitted this to the local governments of Manila and Pasay because during the first week of the lockdown, people were already looking at means to assist people. There have been other initiatives, and as you know, Jamie, I'm quite proud of the Labfest. On
Yeah.
the last day before the lockdown, we had a meeting. It was our annual meeting of directors and playwrights, and then we explained, and other companies have done this. Um, we revised contracts because it is possible to revise a contract or put an addendum to the contract.
Mm.
Most freelancers will have contracts that will say that they get paid in full right after the show. What we did was we revised the contract so that we would pay them in part after deliverables.
Mm.
So, what did this imply? This implied that stage managers, whether the LabFest pushed this through or not, will get paid in part after the first production meeting, after the first design meeting, after the technical rehearsals. So that's the way we did it. We revised all contracts so that everyone, once they submitted a particular deliverable, would be able to get like 10% of whatever they were promised in the beginning. And then we went on, and by the second week of the lockdown, we had already made the decision to um, put all the LabFest plays online. In that way, everyone still had a job. That's one. But even more, you uplift everyone's, it sounds really baduy, but you uplift everyone's spirits by not canceling.
Right.
And I'm not talking of just the people within the LabFest community. I'm also talking about our audience. Because in the middle of all of the cancellations, it is great to hear that someone did not cancel. It's
Right.
just in
That's
a
true.
different format, right? Um, so that is the initiative which we undertook. And I think in terms of your students, it is an initiative that they would understand much better than I would. Because then you are growing with the times. That's what you're trying to do. And that's kind of the job of production as well. You take your reality and you move forward and you
Mm.
try your very best to deal with what there is without the dreaded word cancellation.
Right.
Now, the reality of this whole thing is that I was able to justify employing everyone except our stagehands
Mhm.
because there's nothing physically to move. So I'm very proud of your former stage manager, Lorraine, and another SM, Mara, because they undertook
For that,
private
they're past the
effort,
hat. Yeah.
yeah, to raise funds for the 8 people who lost jobs, and that was their initiative. That was clearly their initiative. So that's it. That's also an example of people um, not sitting down and waiting. I think that's important in this job. You don't sit down and wait for the mountain to come to you. You are
Yeah.
proactive. For example, whenever as a production manager, right, there's always plan A, plan B, plan C. So you cannot panic. So right now, internally, uh, our new festival director and we have like code green is, di ba may ganyan kami? The lockdown is lifted. Life goes back to normal. Hindi pa rin itutuloy yung full staging because there's just no time anymore to do that. But recordings and the online streaming will be done at the CCP. We don't bring equipment out, etc. It will be beautifully done. Code yellow is the lockdown is lifted, but for whatever reason, we cannot use the CCP because we're very near PICC, which is becoming a quarantine area, which has become a hospital. And then the directors do the live streaming from their homes. We provide them with equipment. We're able to travel there and make sure that it's well done. Code red is the lockdown is not lifted. Staged readings will be done with actors in different sites, with the stage manager in different sites, via Zoom or whatever. We actually have an online tech team right now who is trying, they're trying to figure out the best way to do that. So, I mean, it sounds self-serving to promote my own project, but I think it's a matter of this is how we do it. You look at the realities, and I think this is where it helps that I'm actually so deeply into the social sciences. My husband teaches history. You look at your reality, your current reality. You look at the laws of your building, the rules governing your building, and you look at your product, and you figure out how you can do it. Hanggat kakayanin. Kasi, like, so ngayon, di ba, every year we have, like, titibok-tibok, Virgin Labfest, whatever, titibok-tibok. Ngayon, just because of everything, it de facto kapit talaga. De facto yun eh. We were like talking amongst ourselves, hindi, tanggapin na natin, kapit, kasi kumakapit tayo. Yan. That's one way of dealing with this whole thing. Number one, the legal, you deal with their contracts because you do have an obligation to them and you want to help everyone because, freelancers have a difficult time these days. And number two, the creative merged with the beauty of today's technology.
Yeah. One thing, just to go back on the thing about the companies who are able to give regular employment, for example, like you're saying, like Filipino. So is it, because these are resident companies like Ballet Philippines, Filipino. I know, like, for example, I know with Ballet Philippines, one reason they're able to do it also, they have a board, basically. So they're at war with their board right now. But the board is basically what, gives them sort of like funding, like gives them their safety net. With Tanghal Philippines, do they have a similar setup? Because that, like, I know with Ballet Philippines, that's what allows them to operate that way. They sort of have like you were saying, sponsors in a way.
I think what's important for people to know, and not very many people realize, is that all the resident companies of the CCP, except for the Philippine Philharmonic Orchestra, the rest are independent companies.
Yeah,
and
like,
they
they're all
all
private.
have, yeah, they're private companies, and what the CCP provides is less than the amount they need to put up a single production. But yes, TP has a similar system to Ballet Philippines. They have a very active board, and at some point they had similar members in their board. And the board's primary task is to continue raising funds. But you cannot remove the fact that the major expenditure of many other companies outside of the CCP would be venue.
Right.
Because none of the resident companies of the CCP pay rental for the
Yeah,
times that they
that's
use.
that's that's like the subsidy of the government, basically, is the use of the CCP
The
resources or
subsidy of the
venues.
government for the various resident companies varies, but there is always a cash amount,
Hmm.
which changes per company. There's a cash amount, and then there is the use of venues, which is a major deal. Ballet Philippines and Tanghalang Filipino clearly have the biggest part of that pie in terms of use of venues, because the use of venues does not end with the physical use. I mean, just the floor and all of that. They do not pay for utilities either,
Mm.
which is not a small thing. And
Yeah,
then there are the little extras. So, like the use of CCP vehicles, which is, trucking is very expensive.
for the sets and
Um,
everything. Yeah,
the use of the technical equipment of the CCP. But the use of the venues, particularly the theaters and the cash, that is the biggest part of the pie. So it allows them to have like a strong base from which to move on. PETA is a success story because they used to stage things in Intramuros,
mm.
in Fort Santiago, and they didn't own that venue. Intramuros administration managed that. But after many years, they raised enough funds and they put up their own building, right? But now
Right,
they're grappling with the issue of being landowners, because now they have to pay tax, now they have to
right.
pay utilities, now they have to pay
Mm.
security guards, all of that. So I had a conversation with Melvin Lee, and he's like, Nikki, that's why some of our shows have to be commercial, not just,
Yeah, That-
for the
yeah.
cause.
That's why it's lack of ages every every year there's at least.
I know, di ba? So, ayun. So, sometimes when you want to make funds, and that's the reality, you have to do something commercial, for lack of a better word. Things, sometimes you want to do something which is close to your heart, etc. I know that Gantimpala, for instance, for the longest time, they had their four classics, which made lots of money, which allowed them to do their more experimental works.
Yeah,
That was their strategy. But right now, kasi, if you were to compute the money needed, uh, kasi for instance, for ballet, you would need to maintain a company of no less than 20 people, right?
yeah,
And to maintain that, salaries alone, because once you have dancers, then you need accountants, you need etc. and so on and so forth. So it's no joke.
yeah. Like I
The
know with Ballet
Yeah,
Philippines, like one of the parts of their business model is that the school, they have a school, and actually the the BP dance school actually brings in a lot of income for the company itself, even though um, there were some years, like Syria would tell me, there's some years actually it would bring in more income than the company shows itself.
I'm pretty
So
sure, but they would not be able to have a school if they didn't have a venue for the school.
exactly, yeah. So that's
So,
also the yeah.
yeah, that's because the other ballet companies, for instance, Philippine Ballet Theater,
Mm,
when periodically Meralco will tell them na we may kick you out, whatever. There's periodic negotiations about that. Then
right.
they go into it's a major deal.
Yeah.
Venues are such a big deal, and then audiences, you know very well that we still depend heavily on students
Yes.
to watch our shows. There are very few that do not depend on students. And I honestly believe that in terms of marketing, we should move away from that and go to the
Yeah.
enthusiasts rather than the students. Because as a parent, although my kid is way beyond that age, you know, you give them allowance, you give them this, and then school is not cheap.
Yeah.
I probably would not give my kid money to go to the CCP more than once a month, honestly. If she were of school age ngayon, I'd say, na,
Yeah.
bala ka, once a month I can give you, but beyond that, expensive.
Yeah. But the thing is, like even us in comics, for example, that's really because of course with schools it's basically captive audience. You just have to
Yeah.
market to the teachers or the principals, and then they say, okay, we'll bring our whole school with us. Like with us, with my comics, we do school tours also. We do events in schools, and then
Yes.
although we sell, we don't, it's not required for them to buy, but it gives us a chance to talk to, when we perform our comics in front of the students directly. We get to sell directly to them. But it at least, rather than marketing to individual, it's a lot easier on our end. We also have limited resources to just talk to a single person, a school, institutional. Even I think the bigger publishers do the same thing. Like Anvil, when they have children's books, they're
Yeah.
it's interesting with the arts now. Basically, it's almost like it's almost like a B2B in a way. It becomes like
Yeah.
institution to institution selling in a way. I so
Yeah.
the I think the crucial thing is right now with COVID now, as you're saying, I just very interesting what you're saying about the way historians would look at, or social scientists look at things, where this is the reality and then this is the past. You have this how you adjust. It's kind of like what I was telling, because in our course, I kind of structured our syllabus to be like I said, we're going to treat it like a business plan. Your
Yeah.
career, when you graduate, you have to treat it, even if you're not starting a business, you're just getting a job, but you still have to think of your own career as a business. And I said, when I took my master's, what you do is you do an external analysis. You look at the world outside. You look at what we call yung peso. You look at the
Yes.
political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal aspects, what are happening out there. Find out what are the opportunities and threats out there. Then you look inward. You look at your strengths and weaknesses internally.
Yes.
Then after that, you unify that and you adjust. Then you make a strategy based on that. So it for me it's very interesting. I didn't realize that. Oh yeah, even historians, social scientists have to do the same thing, basically, because reality is always changing. But as you're saying now, like if venue is very key to many live performances in the theater world, and then now of course um, there's always been that uh, drum song of we have to shift to digital. Digital has to play a part in something, and now many artists, many companies are forced to be digital. Like with LabFest, you're forced to be digital now. Um, what does that for you, for example, like because you are the CCP, and the business up is, as you said, it's venue management, providing venue.
Yeah.
If what happens now is not, it is the new normal now. That, for example, that one, how are companies? I mean, like performance companies. Do you think they're going to? Are they going to see that we have to either include this or even maybe shift a lot of it to digital because people are used to it now? Or and if you are like for your with the CCP, is that something that you have to include more of? Like we have to have now recording equipment and hire broadband, and we have to get stage managers who know how to do video chat and all these things.
Okay. That's really looking into the future. However, when we were designing this whole digital platform, and we're not quite done designing it, I had to go to experts because I'm not a techie. I had to ask someone to educate me because I didn't know who to hire, who would do this, who would do that. In fact, I didn't quite know what needed to be done. Now, one of the directives of our artistic director was to recognize that putting things on digital, in the digital format, did not mean that it would become a film. It
Yeah,
would have to retain, because you cannot lose sight of what your product ultimately is.
right.
So the word he used was liveness. It would have to retain the sense of being theater, of being intimate theater, of being live.
So
So
there's no
that is a
cuts, edits,
challenge.
close-ups.
Uh-uh.
Yeah, camera angles
Yeah.
are not a part of
It's
the
not a
narrative.
film. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do we need to go more into the digital form? I think so, because we cannot ignore science. And right now, science tells us that in as much as in a few months we may be able to deal with COVID, there was SARS before, there was S1N1, there are an increasing number of these problems. So social distancing might be our new reality. So we have to be ready for that. But Does this mean that live performance per se will disappear? I don't think so. I really don't think so because um, I have never yet heard of an art form that disappeared. We will
Mm.
have to adjust. Actually, one of our first acts with the Lab Fest, when, of course, we read the newspaper and everything, one of our first acts was to cut our audience in half.
Mm.
Because remember, sa Lab Fest, magkakatabihan eh,
Right.
nagsiksikan.
Right. It's
Right?
like doing
So,
your bleachers really. Yeah.
yeah. So,
And this would
if,
have been the
if
first year at the black box. Is that right? Was that isn't it
no,
supposed to be the
no,
first year? No, not yet.
it should have been, but the black box is a whole other story altogether. But
Mm.
um, so what we were going to do was we cut our audience in half so that there would be social distancing, and if that is necessary for the future to ensure that live performance is pushed through, then so be it. So we just have to continuously. I know a lot of artists, sadly, who do not like reading the newspaper, who like reading Facebook as a source of news more than the newspaper. But I think if you are in production management or if you are in an artistic director, even, you have to keep track of what is going on. And then you have to know who to ask for information in terms of how you can adjust. For example, one of the questions that I had to ask a lawyer was broadcast rights for playwrights and directors
Mm.
is totally different from the rights for live performance.
Right.
What are we talking about now that we are live streaming? Is that the
Mm-hmm.
equivalent of broadcast rights? Because certainly the potential of live streaming is thousands of times bigger
Yeah.
than our 330 person capacity, right?
Right.
Well, technically, he said it is not part of broadcast rights, but of course, it is still something that we have to bring up with our
Yeah. I think it's
directors and playwrights.
Yeah, because I think when I looked in the like when I was teaching our class on intellectual property, um, intellectual property law in the Philippines hasn't quite caught up yet to
Oh,
the technology now. You
hasn't.
know.
It really hasn't. It really hasn't. Because if you think about it, once you live stream something, it's a different story altogether. I think right now, what's happening right now during the lockdown or the quarantine or whatever you choose to call it is people are doing a lot of things out of goodwill.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, after the quarantine, when will that goodwill turn into a business model?
Right.
No one is thinking of that yet, but someone has
Exactly.
to think of that because, um, like right now, I have a meeting with our marketing team tomorrow because then they have to figure out how do you accept payments for an online performance. Will
I was
because
actually going to ask that. Yeah.
we don't know yet. Well, they have to figure that out because thus far everyone has been doing donations.
Right.
How do you accept payments? How do you block it from people who did not pay? That is now the challenge to the computer guys. I don't know. They've been, yeah, we are figuring that out. And then in terms of the accountants and all of that, the business people, we have to figure out the after this whole charitable, let us just be one, let us be happy, etc. After that whole business, when you go out and you want to push this as an industry, then a business model has to be made about all of these online shows.
Right.
First,
I think. Yeah. I think like for me, my view as someone who's tried, I've tried also, delving into online content, like with YouTube and all that. One of the things I've noticed, for example, of course, one of the challenges is that there's a sort of a loss in the value of something when it's
yeah,
online and free. The perception.
yeah,
That's why for me, the nice thing about digital, at least I agree with you that you will not live for performances will not disappear, mainly because digital cannot cannibalize that because the experience is totally different. And I think people will still always value something that is live, something that is
yes,
unscripted. I mean, not unscripted, but in a way uncontrollable. It's like a
yeah,
live performance. Part
yeah.
of the appeal set, you don't know what's gonna happen. Something could mess up, or something could be ad libbed, or audience
Yeah.
reaction. So that's
There's
something like
nothing like live.
the music industry found that out, and basically that they shifted before when they started losing income from albums and cassettes and CDs. They figured, we
Yeah.
can stream it, we can make some money in like in like Spotify or iTunes, but the real money comes from the concerts. Actually, we and the merchandise and all that. That's where the big money is, the live aspect, and digital is just part of creating an audience. Um, but I think that the challenge now for me, like one thing I've noticed with digital is that the challenge is that um, you can reach a wider audience, but digital is really more about audience building, and
Yeah.
the percentage of that audience that's willing to pay is like 1% at best, 1 to two
It's very
percent.
small. It's very small. For example, with they streamed ang Goldfish ni Professor Di Maandal the
Mm-mm,
last week, and then I understand that the viewership was almost 1 million,
mm-mm,
pretty big. And then they got a substantial amount, but it did not reach 20,000.
mm.
So it's gratifying that that a lot of people donated and were willing to pay, but if you look at the ratio of actual audience versus donations, because
Right,
previously we keep thinking of digital or online as a means to market. Right
right.
now we are being forced to think of it as a means to stage,
Yeah,
and
or
it's
it, it,
very
it becomes the
difficult.
product itself. Yeah, that it's the
Yeah.
product itself.
So it becomes, that is a challenge now, how to wrap our heads around it and how to deal with that, because we were totally unprepared. We were totally unprepared for that whole idea
Yeah.
of going online. Pero I would like to think that, I mean, in terms of your students, for example, this is what you do. You go out,
Right.
you find out what is legal, and then you ask permission. Just so you know, out of the 12 featured works, three playwrights and directors chose not to be part of the digital format,
Oh, that's why
which
there's
is
only
fine.
nine. Yeah, I saw
Yes.
the announcement. There's only nine. I said, I thought there used to be 12. Right.
No, we had to give them the option because it is their
Right.
call. Our commitment to them was totally different from what we are doing now.
Right.
But we had to make it their call because ultimately copyright belongs to them.
Correct.
We respect that. And if they do not want to see their plays done in that format,
Yeah.
then I actually completely understand.
Yeah, it's within their
And
rights. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, naman. Oo. So, kasi ibang format no matter what you say na you're going to make an effort, etc. and so on and so forth. In the end,
Yeah.
it's their baby, and if they don't want to see it like that, then that's fine. And but this is a luxury thing in the sense that we never actually made a lot of money out of this project. That's the thing also about the government. It is not our job to make a lot of money.
Right.
We will survive even without that because we have funding. The private sector has to keep pushing, 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 because once you lose your funding, then no more. That's it. No more shows, no more whatever, no more products, and a lot of people lose their jobs. And it's always such a fine balance.
Is that just to sort of segue with that? Um, because it's a government, like with the CCP, for example, and it maybe even the projects that the CCP helps subsidize or sponsor. So is there really less of a pressure to be like more commercial, more popular? Because now it's it's so
Yeah,
it's yeah.
yeah.
So
We have the luxury of doing art
mhm,
because it is our mandate is not to make money. Well,
yeah,
it is not our mandate to make money. Of course,
it's just an
if
operational
we
excess if ever you
oh,
make money, hindi siya profit.
if we make money, fantastic, di ba?
Yeah. Just funds the next project if ever. No?
Huh?
It just like whatever
What's
you make excess, just help
Yeah,
fund the next project. It's
yeah,
not like there's no dividends to shareholders to give or anything like that.
yes. It's always a good thing to. And then in terms of practice, I think as a production manager, regardless of whether it is your mandate to turn a profit, I think as a PM, it is your job to monitor budget
Mm.
and to make sure that you at the very least break even. That's still my job, regardless of, it's very hard. It's a lot of people in the government. Sorry to say this, because you're so secure with your job. You it's your little box.
Mm.
You really don't try to go beyond, and that is very sad. I think if you're in the business of the arts, you keep pushing, and you keep trying to think of ways to move forward. Because if we didn't do that, then we would simply have canceled the Labfest. Then for Cinemalaya, the filmmakers for this year, sorry na lang. But Cinemalaya, what they're doing naman is next year, instead of just 12 new featured films, they will have 24 kasi this year plus next year. So everyone has to find a way. Everyone has to find a way around things.
So you're saying like being for example, a production manager also, for the people who are in behind the scenes, the stage and all that. A lot of people think that you enter the arts. Of course, you always think about the performers, the really artistic side. But actually, like you guys in production, stage managers, sound engineers, all that, you're also part of the creative fields, basically. And because of course, I teach just being a creative professional, and I have some of my students, they're actually stage managers in Ateneo and all that. And they were also asking, so what are the prospects going to be like? What skills do I have to know about? And even some people who want to be maybe performers down the line, some of them want to start out also being, as SMs or as a prod crew. What what um what advice would you give them? For example, what skills do they need to have? What's it like to be a production manager? Um, yeah, for
Yeah.
performance that they have to sort of prepare for. What things do you think that they need to um, learn? What mindset do they have to have?
Okay. Well, this reminds, because a long time ago, for 10 years, I handled the CCP Summer Arts Workshop. 10 pretty long years. Now, what I learned from that afterwards was the people who stayed in the business afterwards were not the people who took acting classes,
Mm-hmm.
singing classes, etc. The people who stayed in the field and who continued to find jobs were the stage managers, the lighting designers, the backstage people. So that's one. Now, just the other day when I was talking to JK, my festival director, about our online team, he was talking about getting interns from theater. And I said, do you need interns from theater, or do you need interns from engineering or computer sciences? And I liked his response. What he told me was, we need people who understand theater first, but who also know about technology. So number one, kasi if you're in this business, I think you are first and foremost an artist or someone who loves the arts. There's just no other way around it, because you cannot think, if you're a stage manager, you have to continuously think of what the artist needs. And if you do not understand the mindset of the artist, then you're kind of in trouble. And the only way to do that is to be in his world, really. And now, what would I tell your students? I would tell them be patient, because this is a terrible time, but it will pass. And after it passes, this is what the CCP, because we continue all our meetings, this is a prediction of the CCP. It will take at least a year before the audience decides to go back to the audience, to the theater.
Theater, yeah.
Because there is that fear. There is that fear, and you have to allow people to get over that fear. So be patient, because when the wave comes, in terms of the performances, events, even commercial events, you're talking product launches and everything, it will come. And when it comes, then you have to be ready with your skill set and even more with your attitude. I personally like people who mean I between a brilliant person with a bad attitude and a person who is willing to be taught, who's not necessarily brilliant but who has a good attitude. I would take the person with a good attitude always. Now, what a backstage person needs to have, I think it's very crucial, is the ability to communicate. Because um, the ability to communicate, meaning for me, the ability to listen and to understand what the other person is saying so that you can translate it into the terms of your job. And then the ability to talk about what you need to do, how you need to do it, and how the other people in your team can help you with it, or how you can enhance your jobs. And I say this because so often people presume that the job is being done. So often they are quiet about their own difficulties, that there is no one there to help them. So if you're able to communicate, and if you have a lot of people know how to talk, very few people know how to listen. If you're able to listen and translate it, because so backstage, that's what you do. You translate the artist's desires for, I don't know, a shower at this point in time, or television sets, or whatever, into cables and into concrete form. So more than anything else, if you're able to communicate, for me, that's really half the battle.
Actually, that's a good. One thing I wanted to ask you also was, it's good that you mentioned, the kind of people you like to work with, what you look for when you're looking for people you can collaborate with. I've always wondered, like, how do you find, because as you said, you don't have, the way I understand it, mga SMs are not also employed by the CCP and all that. A lot of them are also freelancers. So how do you find the people? So, for people who are looking, like if the students are looking for jobs, they're looking for opportunities. It'd be good to know, how do organizations, companies, or people like you, how do you find people? How should they network? How should they get themselves known in the community?
You know what? Through the years, kasi in the beginning, it was very difficult. In the beginning, it was very difficult because then you would have to send an open call out, and then a lot of people would apply, and you didn't know them from Adam. Um, but now, of course, with the popularity of the product, people come to us even before we send a call. Now, the other thing that we have done, that the CCP is actively doing, is we link up with schools. Because my friend, see, Dennis Marsigan, was telling me the other day that there is going to be an association of schools with theater arts courses.
Oh.
Because apparently there's 19 now in that single association. So it's almost like a job fair. Now that we know that there is such an association, we can go shopping there. Now, what your students can do is they can keep an eye, and since I'm sure they're almost always online anyway, they can keep an eye on the websites of the companies which they are interested in, because that's where it comes out. It comes out online. And then I know that this is a very emotional business, but one thing I would say is try not to burn your bridges, because the network is very important. It's always like, this person knows someone who knows that person, etc. And then if you are indeed in a position, like if you're a stage manager or production manager, if you're in the position to hire people or to deal with other people, you have to have a good reputation, because some people will refuse to work with people who have not so good reputations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as early as now, I'm telling you, Ateneo is an excellent school, but there are people who don't represent well.
Mm.
So it's a personal reputation. It helps that people come from a good school, right? That
Right.
really, really helps. But in the end, it is your personal reputation.
Yeah. I think I know. Are you talking about the? I think I kind of know what you're talking about with that.
No, there's someone anyway. Last year
Is this
talaga,
from last year? Is this last year's Lab Fest? I
yeah,
think I know what you're
yeah,
talking about.
so bad. That's so bad. But anyway,
Speaking of that, like,
sayang. Yeah.
yeah, can you share like what are some experiences you've had? Good, maybe good experiences, a good anecdote and a bad anecdote that that maybe we can learn from, like, this is what it's like when you're working with someone who's really good, and this is what's like, oh my gosh, it's a nightmare. This is how you kind of have to handle it.
Okay. Kasi when you do a festival, you're dealing with, in the case of the Lab Fest, 21 directors, 21 playwrights, and then these are not always very easy people to deal with. Um, and then 80 actors. What people have to understand about a festival, any kind of festival, National Theatre Festival, etc., is that every single portion has to work perfectly. Otherwise, it's domino. Everything falls down. So, um, we had, Lord, we had an actress. Oh no, we had an actor. Wag na lang yung ano, but we had an actor who did not tell us that he was a flight steward. He did
Hmm.
not tell us. And the way Lab Fest works, as you know, is 3 plays, and then the guy was in the first play. And when we were looking for him, then we learned that he had a flight to Japan.
Hmm.
And the flight had not returned to the Philippines.
Oh wow.
Oh, yeah, I'm not kidding. It had not returned to the Philippines by like 2 hours before the start of the play. It was still in the air.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
oh my God. He arrived, so we already had a plan B. We would switch plays around and everything. And I was like, my God. And the director for the second play is Odi Hemora, and the director for the other play is Carlito Sigunreina. You could have, that is your reputation gone,
Right. Right.
right? That's your reputation. No more. He arrived just like our stage hands were literally on stage about to switch sets around. He came running straight from the airport kasi we were like, naglanding na. Pero hindi pa siya bumababa. Like, bakit hindi pa siya bumababa? Kasi steward siya. Ay, o sige, dahil last trip, ganyan. So, terrible, terrible, terrible. But, that's one way never to get a job again.
Yeah.
Promise. Perfect. You want to lose it. You could not replace him because ayan na yan, but
Mm.
never again. Now, if you're going to talk about good experiences, madami yan. I mean, right now I'm still stuck on Mara and Lorraine
Mm.
raising funds, and they have
Right.
quite an amount for stage hands. And beyond that, I have one stage manager who has committed half of her pay for that. So there are many good people. And then you also have um, si Carlito Sigunreina, who is, a well-known director in the film industry. I of all the directors talaga ng Labfest, he's the one who messages me the most because he said he's very careful not to step on anyone's toes. And he knows that his primary medium is film, so he wants to learn about theater. And I appreciate that very much. I mean, you can message me. You know that I'm online like 90% of the time. You can message me as often as you want. I will respond, provided, especially when I see that you are doing it for a good cause. And then you have the cast of Goldfish ni Professor Di Maandal. When they performed for Open House, I had two cast members over the age of 60 who had never heard of Zoom. You know, si Sherry Lara and Tita Peewee. Si Tita Sherry, whenever she asks for LabFest, hands her phone to one of us to say, "Can you book me a grab car because I don't know how to book." Ganyan. And yet, they entered into the realm of Zoom so that funds could be raised. No questions asked about getting paid. They were just like, "No, sige, let's raise funds." And then they did raise funds. So it's a community. I think in the end, if your students would have any problem at all, it is a problem of dealing, of separating what is personal and what is professional, because it's very difficult in our industry. It is both
Oh yeah.
intensely personal and intensely professional.
Right.
So drawing that line is something that we all have to deal with. Di ba? Lahat tayo.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Exactly.
And you learn that through experience, really.
So one thing I also wanted to ask you about was, you mentioned earlier on, like the CCP is something that was started by Imelda Marcos also, and I think one of the big issues that's one of the issues that's been happening the last few months, if not the last few years, also, is artists having to deal with how to balance, livelihood, art, but now not just livelihood and art, as we talked about earlier, but art, livelihood, and even your values, your ethics, your morals. We've had issues where in Ateneo, the Arete faced that conflict. I'm sure you guys have
Yeah.
faced it many times because
Many,
of
many.
the legacy. So like, what's your take on how can, for the students, how would they deal with that if there's something where, like, because again, like, if your job is, for a freelancer,
It's
sometimes it's a little easier to just say, okay, I won't take on that project. But if you're an employee, where you can't just say, I won't take this on because this is my job. It's not as easy to dismiss.
it's a personal choice. In the end, it is a personal choice. For me, in the end, what happens is I just have to express what I feel. So, for example, when there was that very sudden, unbelievably sudden for me, dinner for Imelda Marcos, they
Mm.
told me the day before it happened, that I would be the production manager. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's tomorrow. And then it's Imelda. Thank you very much. Now, um, beyond annoying. But anyway, so I spoke to my supervisor about it, and then I told him that um, politically, morally, although I recognize that she founded the CCP, I do recognize that the CCP is different now from the way she did it. So I spoke to him about it, and he asked me if I wanted to be relieved. But then my issue was that I could get relieved. I have the ability to communicate. But what about the crew? What about the lower ranking people who do not have the chutzpah to communicate with their boss and say, I don't like this? So that is why I said no, I will stay so I can at least take care of the boys. Because there were many, many issues with that dinner, not beyond the what was published.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. I was able to express myself. I put it on record, but it was my job. Now, as to, another example would be APEC, ASEAN, all of the events for that. That was much easier for me because although I was at a state dinner where the president was as late as he is for all of his scheduled press briefings these days, it was 3 hours late, and I had like 9 heads of state waiting at Sofitel. For those activities, it's very clear to me. I am not working for the man, but the country is hosting this. So you have to help the country put its best foot forward, regardless of whether you accept the politicians that they had or not. In the end, for me, it is personal choice. For us in the government, if you're very careful and you're not absent all the time, you do have leave credits. So you can go on leave. Yun, difficult.
Yeah. Is there? Do you think one thing I've always been sort of grappling with is just like with things like with COVID, where we think, okay, this is the reality of it. Is there a creative way to deal with it? Is there some kind of creative way to deal with those kinds of situations? You know, for example, with when you know you are stuck with your circumstance, you can't help but um, either your job's on the line or social relationships are on the line. A creative way to deal with it, aside from that you don't. I think the way you've done it is pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not a compromise per se, you know. Um, but for example, I always wondered, like for example, like with this sa home camp namin, like sa Arete, diba? Or even sa Dulang UP, with the whole thing also about inviting Marcos to watch and all that. Um, are there ways where institutions, we're always saying that you have to, I guess you have to be more than just your legacy. You have to move, you can move
Yeah.
beyond it, like with the CCP. Um, is there something when, you know, where um, I don't know, is there a way where we can
Because I don't
acknowledge?
know, because it depends on the institution and it depends on your supervisor. I'm very lucky because
Yeah,
I grew up with my we've been there for, the same number of years. However, what I would say to your students is to be careful. What I'm
yeah,
saying, in other words, when you enter a job, don't go on leave just for the sake of going on leave. Do your job well para may puhunan ka.
yeah,
Because, if you back yourself into a corner, you have no leave credits, your boss has issues with you, etc., then you don't have wiggle room.
right,
I Although I work where I work and I have all of these benefits, I will say that a lot of my wiggle room, or my room to adjust things, has been, and it sounds conceited, through my own efforts, because I'm never absent.
mm,
Because, well, not never, but I'm rarely
yeah.
absent, and because I take care of my relationships and all of that. So if I did not have that, then my personal choices would certainly be more limited. So when you enter an institution, they will immediately give you a briefing, right, on, okay, these are your entitlements, this is your job, etc. Don't use up all your entitlements. Build on things first. Keep building, building, building. Because honestly, all of these conflicts, they're not constant. They
Mm.
will come a few times each year, and but when they come, you really have to be ready.
With looking, switching the topic on the other side naman, like on the terms of on the, what do you call this, the perspective of the audience, because
Yeah.
one issue that also happens now is what they call in cancel culture, where basically where they say, if someone, if we view them as they don't align with a particular value, then we have to cancel them, we boycott them and all that. Some are arguing that maybe it's going a little too far, where, like I remember, like I think a few weeks ago or a few months ago, I read President Obama had a comment about that also, where he felt even in the U.S., for example, with some of the more liberal, the Democrats and all that, may have been taking that a little bit too far, and that you can't expect everyone to be fully morally pure in a way. Because I just think like now with, I personally believe the arts is a very powerful weapon in trying to
Yeah.
create a certain kind of culture. But if the main way of fighting, forces that sort of, that for lack of a better term, evil forces out there in society, but if our weapon there is basically canceling, and it doesn't it sometimes become a weapon that, a double-edged sword, where we're sort of hitting ourselves more when it doesn't really affect the other people. I just wonder, for example, like with, I remember when issues come with CCP, with venues like CCP
Yeah.
Arete,
Yeah.
and they say, oh, they did this, they slipped up with supporting the market, ganyan. It's not watch, it's boycott them, it's not watch. Does that actually weaken, uh, their side rather than the other side? So what's the, how do you think then patrons of the art, supporters of the art, should sort of navigate that, and how are there things that artists and the venues can do to help them promote that, that different method of
No, the way I see it kasi is okay, if I am not in that position, I am not in the position to make
yeah,
institutional
of course,
decisions.
right,
Now, the people who are in the position to make decisions on behalf of their institution, including decisions to cancel or to end an exhibit earlier, such as what happened at the CCP with, anyway,
yeah,
um, all of these people, they worked hard so that they could make those decisions. But now, for to re- so they could reach that point. For all the rest of us, to my mind, it goes back to personal choice.
mm,
Personally, I have never ever unfriended someone who is of the opposite political belief. I have not unfriended anyone. I have not blocked anyone who does not believe as I do. I have unfollowed, but that's simply because my news feed is just so busy.
yeah,
Um, the other thing I think is you cannot be preaching to the choir. So we have to stop performing just for the people
right,
who already believe as we do. That's my personal belief. So if someone who uh, who hates communists, for example, watches one of the plays in the lab fest, yung paano humawak ng baril ang babae, then well and good, baka matuto ka or whatever, you know. It is a matter of personal choice, and personally, I will respect all of your choices except when they are not legal,
mm,
and except when they, when it comes to hurting. Now,
right,
of course, my counterpoint to that is you'd better respect me as well.
mm,
Ganun
sure,
lang.
yeah. So I guess
Hirap na.
I
Hirap
know.
ah.
Yeah,
Na, okay lang.
on the hot seat ba, on the hot seat.
Okay lang, okay lang. Go
So
on.
what else did we know? Well, yeah, basically, I guess just to wrap up, with so how do you? I don't know. We I guess we sort of broached it a little bit earlier, but how do you then see, for example, the future of the performing arts of institutions like yours, venues, um, as after this whole crisis, this whole pandemic. Um,
Yeah. I think, do you know that in the Great Depression, there is one industry that did not sink? It was the entertainment industry
hmm,
because people could not buy food, but they sure as heck wanted to be
right,
entertained. So it's a tidbit that has stuck in my head. So, with that in mind, see, history kasi social
yeah,
sciences. With that in mind, I think give the audience time after this pandemic. People will come back to the theater. I remain optimistic because people have been responding and the arts has been responding to the needs of the people. So it will, what I was telling JK the other day, right now we listen to science because science, it is through science that this thing will be cured or managed. But after science has done that, then you go to the social sciences and to the arts for the long-term solution to many of the issues that will remain after the physical has been cured. I really believe that. I don't believe that the performing arts will disappear. I think that we will lose money for a year or two, but after that, aahon tayo. Of course, the president is saying he's going to sell the CCP, in which case I'm
there we
available
go.
for hire.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, talaga.
You have to read every week, but what's going to change now? What's he going to say now?
Grabe.
Oh my gosh. Do you think do you, do you think that uh, that with the audiences, even though live will not go away, but do you think there's going to be a shift in the way the audiences like there's been a big uptick in like the theater industry has been booming the last few years, events and all that. Like one of my first guests in the class actually was Sir Floyd Quintos was also talking to us, and he was
Mm.
basically saying that like with him, events, whether private events like weddings, corporate events, of course, and theater, all it's all booming. And all of a sudden now it came to a sudden halt, and so now we're as you said earlier, we're shifting to digital to sort of maintain that momentum to so that it stays. But do you think that it will um, even though theater will not totally go away, is there going to be a change in the way audiences like do you personally think they're going to be more accepting of digital now, like those who are sort of afraid of it, or those who figure out like who are afraid to pay for something online might be more willing. I've donated now once, so if I want to pay for something now,
I think
willing na
I
ako.
think
Or do you think do you think that, for example, that what we mentioned earlier there, where this was free before, like during the in April and March. Why do I have to pay for it now? Is that going to be also an issue down the line?
I think number one, when the CCP was built in 1969, uh, Imelda said that there were seven arts, because at that time there were indeed seven arts as she defined it. And then slowly, film broadcast and new media came into being. I think after COVID, there is a new means to bring the arts, and it might even be a new art form, which would be online, digital, whatever. For all I know, it has been there all along. There is just a research. It's just surging right now. But I firmly believe that after that, with the addition of a new art form, the addition of a new art form does not mean the death of another. Now, if you go further, sorry, if you go further, then um, people are just waiting. People are just waiting for physical contact again because we miss each other. So once that happens, even if there is the rule of social distancing, I have to believe that eventually people will gather again and go to the theaters. And the other thing we have to realize is, because of the magic of medicine and all of that, our senior citizens are older than they used to be. Diba? Dati, if you're in your
Yeah.
70s, medyo nakaabang ka na. But now, you know, my my mother-in-law is 87, my father is 86, and they're pretty healthy. So you have all of those people who are not into the World Wide Web. So you have that significant chunk of your population as well. And then you have your performers who uh, who will not let go of the thrill of a live
Mm.
performance. I do
Yeah.
think, however, and I told this to our directors, that we are possibly entering a new age, the age of social distancing, and that will inform many of our artistic choices. I was asking our directors now, and they were literally scratching their heads. So we go, how do you block with social distancing in mind?
Mm. That's
How
right.
how how do you do how do you do that? Because what if the play calls for a kiss? So I have absolutely no idea right now. I have no idea. I would imagine it's even more difficult for choreographers because it's such a physical thing, and then you
I
have
hadn't
your
thought of that.
athletes and
Yeah.
all of that. Yeah, but um, we don't know, and since we don't know, I would like. I really believe it that we will find a way around it, and that the performing arts will remain. It's just that you need people to hang on, kapit kapit talaga, and then find ways around it.
Okay.
Yun.
Anyway, is there so let's make it like a talk. So do you want to promote anything? We'll promote promote
Virgin
Labfest.
Labfest, June 10 to 28. We will post on the Facebook page the mechanics for the new format of Virgin Labfest, which I hope is only this year. Anyway, yan. Okay. Eventually, I hope to see your students live and in person.
Yes, hopefully.
It
If
would
ever
be
I know if you
nice.
have any questions, because I might post this on like on YouTube and so if they have questions, I can forward them to you or they can post in the comment section.
Yes,
We get there.
sure.
Um, last na pahabol. So do you ever imagine time where even though of course like Lab Fest the live we'll go back to being live performances starting next year. Do you think that the virtual aspect is something that can still be retained even as a segment of it, as a portion of it, depending
I,
on how it?
I'm I'm actually thinking that if we succeed with the digital aspect of it, it might be a whole new component of the lab fest.
Yeah, like
That means
aside from stage
lab fest
readings,
will be
virtual
prolonged.
readings. Yeah,
No, because already we are slowly putting funds so that the at least we start with the revisited plays. We call them back and then we ask them to perform for the camera.
right.
So Contrabida has a format in HD because in the future we were already thinking of streaming it like the Met HD series.
Yeah.
So baka napilitan lang kami na agahan ngayon, you know what I mean? Because there was already that thought. Because the problem of live performance is it's very ephemeral. After that, it's done.
Right.
Now, this is a
Exactly.
way to extend its life, and maybe COVID forced us to do it earlier than expected.
Oh wait, so extend becoming interview, because you guys, one thing I always wondering that you guys do have archival footage, video, with most, if not all, the performances at CCP.
All of the performances where the owner of the copyright permitted us to document from
Mm.
1969 onwards, and there are truthfully a few people who did not permit us to document. Essentially, quite a number of the international artists. Pero
Mm.
siguro about
So
98% of all shows.
is it an opt out thing? Like by default, you will record it, but you have to let us know if you don't want. So it's an opt out thing.
Yeah, yeah. Because it's in
So
their contract.
yeah.
It's in their contract that you permit the CCP to record. It was in your contract to record for archival and marketing purposes. That's what it says there. Now, it is in the library, and students are permitted to watch, but they're not permitted to dub
Um,
without
so
the express permission.
so in terms of like going to copyright, so that means the CCP does not. You don't have the broadcast rights or
No, we don't. No, we
although that's
don't.
why it's based for archival. So
Yes.
who then owns the rights to those videos or those? Is it the owners or the? Because
No, physical. Oh,
what I understood, like for example, when I was looking at the intellectual property law, like when it's audiovisual, copyright is joint between I think the director, producer, script writer, and I think even cinematographer. Unlike for example, when it's written works, it's sole ownership by author upon creation. When it's broadcast, I think it's upon broadcast and it's joint because it's usually collaborative. So I was wondering when it's something like that, like when it's a theater play that's recorded. That I'm not sure. Like when is I would assume that the like with theater copyright. Well, with a recorded performance, does the copyright of the video itself? Does CCP have joint copyright with the creator, with the writer director, or?
writer director yan for theater because of the blocking.
Mm,
So whenever, okay, what is in the contract? Hindi ko memorize, but it's for archival, educational. I think educational is thrown in there. Purposes, which permits us to show it to students as
but
long
it's
as they
fair
do not
use.
dub. Yeah. Now, if it is commissioned work, diba? If it is a play that say, if it is a Rene Villanueva play that Tanghalang Filipino staged, then
Mm,
Rene Villanueva owns the copyright, and whoever directed it co-owns it because of the staging. Now, if it is a work that Tanghalang Filipino commissioned of whoever, of say Rodi Vera, then Tanghalang Filipino would also would
right.
be
It
part
is
of
in
the
their
group that
contract.
we would ask permission from. So we do it on a case to case basis. We're actually fairly strict about it. Even the scripts which are archived at the library, we do not allow photocopying of that
Mm,
unless we have the there is express permission from whoever owns copyright, and there are contracts for all of them.
But for the recordings, so you're basically stewards of all those all that
Yes,
material.
yes,
But
we are
the
stewards. That is the right term.
yeah, but the artists themselves would still have right even to the recordings of that.
I'm sorry.
So like the artists, like the owners, the copyright holders also have rights to the those recordings also.
Yes,
Okay, you know.
yes,
Okay. So maybe I can also get a copy of my my
yes,
last. I didn't know
yes.
that. See?
You're entitled to one copy,
Oh, okay.
one
So I
free
think I should.
copy, one free dubbing.
Okay, I should get around to doing that pala.
Yeah,
Wala pala akong
yeah.
copy ng ano. Okay. So yeah, anyway, thanks Nikki. Thanks so much for ano. So
Had fun, Jamie. Thank you
yeah,
for
me too.
teaching
Wait,
me this time.
I'll